so welcome. I'm going to take a moment while people are still logging in to give a brief introduction to CUAHSI and some upcoming events that we have. And then I will pass it off to the AGU H3S committee who has organized this webinar with these incredible panelists. I'm very excited. And yeah. And so with that, I'll get started. So welcome everyone to this webinar. We're very lucky to have to be here with some incredible panelists invited by the AGU Hydrology Section Student Subcommittee to discuss imposter syndrome, a topic that I'm sure that we're all likely all too familiar with, but one that we don't often discuss. So before we begin, as people are logging on and getting settled, I'm gonna go through some upcoming events at CUAHSI before I hand it off. My name is Julia Masterman. I'm the Science Education and Outreach Coordinator at CUAHSI, which stands for the Consortium of Universities for the Advancement of Hydrologic Science, Incorporated. In case you guys are not familiar with us, our mission is to support the advancement of interdisciplinary water science in a number of ways, some data services, as well as education and outreach opportunities like these webinar series. I'd encourage you to connect with us via Twitter, Slack, or our newsletter. And my email is at the bottom here. And if you ever want to contact me for any of these opportunities. The first one that I want to talk about today, we have a workshop coming up with the Stroud Water Research Center on open source electronic hardware for water research and real-time online water monitoring. This is going to be a virtual workshop via Zoom, and the registration deadline is next week. So I would encourage you to check that out and learn more. The kit you see on the screen will be sent to all of the participants, and you'll learn how to program this Mayfly data logger with open source code that is created for off-the-shelf water sensors that you might already be using or have in the lab. And it'll be held in November, but registration is next week. The second opportunity is actually pretty relevant. It's a potential opportunity for professional development. This is a new essay contest that CUAHSI is launching this year. It's a funding opportunity where undergraduates and graduate students are able to submit an essay talking about what they see the future of the hydrologic science community as. So this is an opportunity to share areas of research that you think are the future, maybe potential ways that the community could do better, or how your views on what on the hydrologic science community as a whole. There will be 2 awards granted to an undergrad and a graduate student, and winners will receive registration and travel to a future CUAHSI meeting, either the biennial or the joint hydrologic science meeting in 2022, a $500 honorarium, and other opportunities to present their vision to the water science community. The prompt and more info can be found on our website, and there's a QR code as well. And finally, another funding opportunity, the Hydroinformatics Innovation Fellowship is now accepting applications. The application deadline is October 30th. This is a fellowship program where participants can create a hydroinformatics product to be disseminated to the CUAHSI community. So things like pieces of software or apps or STEM curriculum would all fall under potential things you could apply for funding via this fellowship. And for more information, check out our website or reach out to me directly. And with that, I'm excited to kick off this webinar, part of our Navigating Academic Waters series. Let's talk about, you do belong. Let's talk about imposter syndrome. And with that, I'd like to pass it off to Irene from the Hydrology Section Student Subcommittee with AGU to introduce our panelists.
Thank you so much, Julia. Hello and welcome everyone. On behalf of the AGU Hydrology Section Student Subcommittee, thank you for joining us today to discuss You Do Belong, and let's talk about imposter syndrome. we are holding this panel in full recognition that many members of our community are feeling more than just a lack of belonging. Therefore, please join me to take a moment of silence as a time for reflection. I am Irene Garousi Nejad, currently a PhD candidate at Utah State University and a first-year member of the AGU H3S. This webinar is co-led by me and my colleague, Tom Gloss. Tom, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody.
Thank you. In addition to us, a whole bunch of people from H3S development team actually helped to develop this webinar, so I do appreciate their help. Our goal today is to discuss the pervasiveness of imposter syndrome. As a group spanning multiple career stages and experiences, we aim to talk about how we can actually overcome this widespread issue so we can start maybe trying to shake it out. Here is a format. As Julia mentioned, this is a Q&A seminar. So please, if you have a question, we have a bunch of questions asked in the 45 minutes or so, but if you have any other questions, please put them into the chat box and we will do our best to cover them. Here today, it's my pleasure to say that we have with us Rachel Scarlett, David Brown, Kamini Singha, and Hendratta Ali. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. And would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, I'll go first, since you called me first. I'm Rachel Scarlett. I'm a PhD candidate at Purdue University. And I was asked to be on this panel because of a paper that I wrote called Gendering and Racializing Academic Spaces. And I thought no one ever read that paper. So when Julia emailed me, I was like, whoa, someone actually like read this. So imposter syndrome is like already happening. But in that paper, I talk about my experiences as a Black woman, moving through an engineering department for graduate school. So I hope I can talk about those experiences today.
Thank you. David, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, this is Dave Brown. I'm recently retired as of just about a month ago from Cal State University, Chico. And my understanding is my invitation for this panel was due to my work with the first-gen faculty, staff, and students at Chico State. That was a seminal kind of learning experience for me and understanding a lot of where my imposter syndrome issues came from and probably persist. And I think that's a very important area that all of us should be dealing with because the number of first-gen students is rapidly increasing across the country.
Great, thank you. Kamini, would you please introduce yourself?
I'm Kamini Singha. I'm a professor of hydrogeology at the Colorado School of Mines. I believe I was asked in part because I had admitted in a recent interview to my imposter syndrome, which I think probably many of us have. I have moved institutions a few times. I worked at the USGS before. I'm biracial. I'm obviously, well, I guess maybe not obviously, I'm a woman. And so my path may look very similar to many of yours and maybe different than others, but I'm looking forward to sharing with you.
Thank you. And Hendratta?
Hello, everybody. I'm Hendratta Ali. I'm an associate professor at Utah State University. And I'm trying to think of why I was invited to this panel. I think it's because I'm a Black woman, also because I led a petition, or because I was an international student as a graduate student here in the US. Yeah, I have too many intersections, but definitely, and some that you don't even know about, okay? And I'm just gonna spill the beans.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you everyone. So I want to start with this, that a single definition of imposter syndrome will likely fail to encompass how each one of us feel about it or think about it. So our working definition as a group that we were working to kind of develop this webinar was that the imposter syndrome is a feeling of severe inadequacy that can lead to individuals to doubt their accomplishments and to fear being exposed as frauds. This experience but can affect anyone regardless of career stages or success, and can be worsened even by systemic exclusion and lack of representation. So our panel today has a lots of diversity in terms of background, as Hendratta mentioned, experiences, career stage. With that being said, I just want to ask each one of you, what would you add to our definition, our working definition of imposter syndrome? Or how have your experiences shaped your definition of that? Who would you like to start first, please? Yeah, go ahead.
One addition I might add is that some of these feelings of inadequacy may not be severe or always severe. They can be chronic. And that's something that's been more of an issue with me, where it comes up periodically. I actively feel it, but I also have, it's kind of a recurring background. It's what I call a chronic, more of a chronic condition in that regard.
Good point, yeah.
Yeah, so I think I'll say the feeling is situational for me, and it's very situational, but it's also born from the realization and sometimes the expectation that people want me to feel imposter syndrome, that I'm constantly being questioned, I'm constantly being doubted, I'm constantly being challenged. So much so that I have to stop and ask myself, am I missing something? So it's kind of sometimes imposed and sometimes genuine, but it's very situational for me.
Good point, yeah. Thanks for bringing that up, yeah. Go ahead.
I agree with Dr. Ali. A lot of the times it's situational, and a lot of the times it's externally forced. And I've had to take the time to actually look at all of these situations and analyze them together, because one situation happens and you may just be like, oh, that's an anomaly, it just happened. But I think, you know, over your entire graduate career, you're going to, especially as a woman of color in academia, you're going to have so many times where people question why you're in an academic space. So I think at some point you need to look at all of these experiences and realize that you're not the only one experiencing this, and start to think about how you're going to manage it.
I don't have anything particularly insightful to add that hasn't been said, but I think the part that I wanted to bring up was the idea that these things do come and go. I know that my imposter syndrome was much more real early in my career. And there are moments where I have days where I don't have it, and then days where it comes back full force. So that idea of this being sort of an evolving thing, that there are these external pieces, but for me, there's also internal pieces where I just think if something good happens, that I shouldn't have gotten that good thing. And so I think fighting that will be a thing that I battle with probably my whole career.
Yeah, great points. Just to follow up on that, could you talk about what could be some of the root causes, or when actually this imposter syndrome might start in your own experiences, or maybe if you observe someone else with that issue?
Maybe I start. So the first thing I want to share is I did not really have a word for imposter syndrome until I came here and came involved in all these discussions. Then I realized, oh, so this feeling was imposter syndrome. As somebody who did most of our education in Cameroon, I did only my PhD in the United States. So my undergraduate, my master's degree, postgraduate were all in Cameroon. And the colonial expectation that people in the global south are generally not smart or intelligent or insightful is something that I think breeds a generalized feeling of imposter syndrome in communities where We just think that we're inferior. We're not up to par. But what I think is much more revealing for me is when I discovered that actually I was very knowledgeable and that I had contributions to make that surpassed my imposter syndrome. And that was actually when I did my very first interview for a job. And it's another story to tell, but the summary of it is, while my male colleagues did 3 interviews, as a woman, I did 5. And to add to that, I also had to do a written test. And because I did not expect anything to come out of it, I basically just wrote my thoughts and my ideas in the test. And when I finally got hired for this job, it was for a pipeline construction project as an environmental geologist. And they gave us the document, the environmental assessment plan. I discovered an entire section that were my answers, word for word, including the typos. And I was like, damn, I know stuff that these people need. So the feeling that I had about not being adequate suddenly vanished. I was like, I know things that people want. I know things that people need. And so I think for me, that flipped the coin, and I stopped undervaluing my ideas until I came here. And then it started all over again, where people keep telling me, you're not adequate enough. So that is why for me, it's much more situational. I always think back to that moment when I am having these doubts about my abilities and my skills.
Great, yeah, that was a great insight. Actually, that raises a question that we got from this audience from our work. It was about the international students who, because they transition to a new educational system here, they get that feeling that their backgrounds, just because of this difference between the educational system, might make them inadequate. So do other panelists have a point to add to that too, that can help these students to feel that really their previous experiences and backgrounds are their assets, and that should not raise that imposter syndrome or feeling inside of them? So do you have any advice for those students?
I can speak to that maybe. So because I have been in that position and I have had those feelings where it comes, it's mostly tied to our having a different accent than the one that people in the community we are studying in have, and or having names that are not familiar to those communities. So there is change your name. I have had to take accent reduction classes because as a student, I was told, you have to speak so that your professors can understand you. When I became a faculty, oh, you have to speak so that your students can understand you. And I was like, so those are the things that make us feel like we're inadequate. But I learned that when it comes down to doing the work, with the limited experience that I'm bringing or the limited resources that I had as a student and as an international student, you should feel proud that you are able to participate in this community with not having had all the privileges that the community now is providing, because our learning curve is very exponential. When I started my PhD program, I never used a computer. And within a few months, I was just as proficient as everybody else. I mean, I give myself a tap on the back for that. And I think if you start thinking in that way, you kind of shed this imposter syndrome really, really fast. So that's the advice I would give any international student is look at the super skills that you have in catching up really, really fast. And don't dwell on the people who critique your accent or your background or your culture.
Thank you so much. That was great. Yeah,
One other thing I've tried to do with international students throughout my whole career is to encourage them that they're taking on an effort that's pretty much way beyond just from the language skills, not to mention the cultural adaptation of what domestic skills ever do. Learning is hard or is challenging, but to do it in a different language, that's, and in the technical fields especially, I think I'm of a mind that it's important to really recognize, even if it's just to the student themselves, to acknowledge we can be mentors informally and supporters and allies informally, person to person. I think that would help, because we don't tend to give praise very well in academia a lot of times informally. And I look at, say, well, what can you bring from your literature that's not maybe readily available in English? That's getting better all the time. But I've said, what are people publishing in the journals, any journals that might be produced in your language or your region, your country? What indigenous knowledge? That's something I've been interested in since my undergraduate years and observations. There's anecdotal information out there in the world that we don't see because we don't work in sub-Saharan Africa, or I have never worked there. What can I learn from people who have worked there and have learned there? And I think that's the sort of thing that we can, again, express as peers. So I think individually, we have a lot of power, regardless of where we are, as students, as faculty, as mentors or peer mentors, to really help international students deal with this by elevating them and valuing them.
Yeah, I guess, oh, sorry. I was going to say, this isn't necessarily specific to international students, but Hendratta's point made me think of maybe the piece of advice that I always give most about imposter syndrome, which is that for me, when I started in a faculty position, I defined myself by this singular axis, right? And it was like research prowess. And I was way down here at 0, right? And so it's pretty intimidating as a PhD student or an early career faculty member to see yourself down here when you define yourself on that single axis. And so the thing I had to think about was how to think of myself in multidimensional space. And I think international students have this potential to have really different axes than some of the rest of us. But, I thought, what if I pop a y-axis and it's running the mile? And if I looked at my faculty colleagues at my first institution, I probably would have crushed like most of them. Like I was really high on y-axis, right? And so I had to think about how to build a sail, where my z-axis was, I don't know, like bar fights or something I wished I was good at. I'm completely untested, but I feel like it could be my thing. And so like if I have this sail, then I can start to think of myself as sort of a whole human rather than just this research prowess axis, which you could also transition out for time. Some of this is just time. And so, so I think international students have this potential to have some really cool axes there that make them a whole human and make them a really interesting scientist in a way that some other people can't be or have.
Great, those are great insights. Yeah, Rachel, we would like to hear your opinion on this. For most of us, it's hard to imagine that academic life, it is hard actually to imagine having an academic life without imposter syndrome, right? It seems to be part of this ecosystem, but at the same time, it can be very painful for us. So with that being said, we just want to know, how does this, in your opinion, how does this culture within academia worsen the imposter syndrome for individuals without or at the intersection of social identities, like including race, gender, or gender expression, and so on? Could you add something to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And within my experiences within academia, I've had many small experiences where people have doubted my belonging within academic spaces. So I've had other graduate students tell me, like, I'm glad I didn't work with you. I'm glad I didn't collaborate with you because I don't think you're prepared to work on this project. I've had mentors tell me, you're not where you're supposed to be right now. You're not where these other students are. They're doing much better than you. You need to advance a lot faster. So I've had these little things in my head and I'm just like, okay, maybe I'm doing something wrong. During my first 3 years of graduate school, that's all I thought about. Like, okay, I'm not where I'm supposed to be. But then I had a very, I guess, I had an experience that just threw everything into my face. So I was going to campus to work on one of my projects on the weekend. And I parked outside of my building, which was free parking, anyone can park there. And as I stepped out of my car, I saw someone taking pictures of my license plate. They were taking pictures of my front license plate, my back license plate. And I was like, okay, what's going on? I asked the person and they said, you shouldn't be here. Why are you here? They didn't think I was a student. And they were questioning my existence on campus. So at that point, I just saw, okay, this is not about me being inadequate. This is about people thinking that I don't belong here because of my race. So that's why I started to say, you know, a lot of imposter syndrome for me is external. It's that people think I don't belong because I'm a woman of color, and they don't see a lot of women of color making it through academia.
Yeah. Unfortunately, these are the things that we have to, we see every day, and I really hope that there's going to be a day that we can see these less. So we know that support and representation seems to be important in feeling like you do belong, right? Did you, any of you, or do you still have a mentor that supports you and provides you with guidance? Or do you know of any available resources out there that someone can use to find mentors? And here I'm really hoping that you could touch on how did your mentors, if you had one, help you feel supported and feeling like you belong?
Yeah, I guess I would say I hope everyone can find mentors in their space. I don't think one person will ever solve all of the needs that we have. I have had mentors throughout my career, both you know, of a variety of backgrounds, both in my institution and in other places. There are some resources. I know that the International Association of Hydrogeologists or Hydrologists, they have been trying to put together a mentoring program that's international for many years. So there are some other opportunities out there for people that are beyond just maybe what you find at your own current space.
Yeah, I would also jump in here and say that, yes, I have had many mentors and many allies. And I want to make the point that it's very difficult to have only one mentor because we need different people for different experiences and for different aspects of our lives. So there are things that I experience as an international faculty member that my white domestic peers might never understand, and I need somebody who has that background to be able to understand me. And there are certain things that my peers, people who are at the same professional level like me, understand that senior folks or junior folks don't understand. So I've had a spectrum of mentors and allies that I don't think one would replace the others. And there are some that are just constant in my life. But for resources, there is Mentoring 365, and I think we can put that in the chat box. Mentoring 365 is a consortium of, I think, 5 professional societies: AGU, I know AGU, SEG, IRIS, American Meteorological Society, I think, that they've come together to create this network where you can go in and look at profiles, look at people, and contact people to see if you want to mentor or be mentored. So that's a really good global resource. So check it out. And then I think most professional societies have mentoring programs. I know GSA has a mentoring program. I know SEG has one. I think AAPG is putting one together. So if you are a member of any professional society, please check their resources because there's likely to be a mentoring program for you.
Wow, great. Yeah, thank you.
I would advocate for graduate students at least to create a peer network, peer mentoring network. I have one and it's phenomenal, and I just wanted to share a little bit about what happened just yesterday. I had a friend win an award, and then she says in our group chat, I feel like I have imposter syndrome right now. Am I even qualified to do this? And then all of my friends in my group are coming in like, girl, please stop, like you deserve this. Someone else is saying you're qualified. we believe in you, you're going to be great for this. And all of these like positive messages will help drown out all of the negative ideas that are in your head. And I'm a person that needs external validation. And I know that, I admit that about myself. That's one of my vulnerabilities. I need that. So having this peer network that is outside of my department, I'm not in competition with these people, but they know my experiences because they're also students. They're also women of color. They share my experiences. So it's a great way to just be able to be vulnerable with people that do not have any control over your career.
Great suggestions, yeah.
One other source for me that is one thing about getting older is you tend to outlive some of your student mentors, which is sad, but natural. And what I found just in the last 5 or 6 years is getting involved with the first gens, faculty, staff, and student organizations. Our Office of Diversity and Inclusion, to me, was what saved my, I'll say my life, my sanity and my enjoyment of my career, the end of my career. And it was really peer mentoring with that. New faculty mentored me about certain topics and certain feelings I was struggling with and certain attitudes I was trying to sort through. There weren't too many senior to me at that point, but you know, people across the spectrum of different cultural, ethnic, religious, age, backgrounds, and realistically, they were critical to me. And those, excuse me, those were those type of organizations oftentimes are the basis for first gen organizations. And that's one that really does transcend most of the, you know, the typical groups and labels and support programs that we have, that we all share many of the same things. And realistically, it's that peer mentoring. I can't stress that, whether you're a student, find peers, as well as maybe faculty and staff and advisors. But realistically, if you're in the academic, working in the academic world, it doesn't have to just be within your discipline. For me, it was really fun to hang out with communication folks and multicultural gender studies faculty and things like that. So it's the peer mentoring for me that really was critical.
Yeah, excellent suggestions and resources out there. And I believe that our team just put the links to some of these resources. We'll make sure to add them and send them to all of you. And before moving on to the next question, Rachel, this is a follow-up question for you. One of the, or anyone else that if you could answer, but one of our audience would like to know if you feel comfortable answering this. We have an audience wondering if you could address how to manage imposter syndrome given the documented bias, discrimination, and ethical issue in academia.
Yeah, that's a good question. And for me, a lot of it for me is getting a peer network, like I said earlier, but it's also developing allies and mentors within my network that can help, that actually support me and allow me to be vulnerable. So when I was going through all of these experiences with people just stereotyping me or literally telling me that I don't belong, I had to look within my department to find people that I knew would support me. So I created a network of faculty mentors within my department and outside of my department that I can just be truthful with about these experiences, and people that can help me realize that it's not in my head. That was the one thing you have to know, like, this is not only about you. This is a problem that they have with you, that they're putting onto you. But another resource that I found was actually on social media and Twitter. There have been lots of hashtags going around, like Black in the Ivory. So that hashtag there's lots of people that are explaining or that are detailing their experiences as Black students within academia. And there you can see that you're not alone. And this is happening to many people. And really, to address it, if you really want to address the larger issue, that's a problem that the university has to deal with. It's a problem that faculty members in your department have to deal with. And I have been a part of challenging my department to do better and be better when it comes to this, to create more inclusive spaces that make me feel like I belong. And it's something that I've taken upon myself, and not everyone has the time to do that. But I think if you do feel, if you feel energized around this, I think you should give your energy to creating more inclusive spaces within academia so that people coming behind us don't have to experience these same unfortunate experiences.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, great. And I know that we already addressed this based on your suggestions, Hendratta, you and other panelists, that it's really helpful to go and finding like many mentors, not just one. But here is the question that, what is your advice to those students who struggle with their supervisor and their colleague who repeatedly makes them doubt their skills and their work is insignificant? It is really good to go and find other people to share this experience with them. But what we want here is any advice how they should specifically do for that relationship with their supervisors, you know, how they can overcome this situation. Yeah, Kamini.
Yeah, I'm thinking about how to phrase this one, because I don't know that I have good advice, but I feel you, I guess, to the person who said this. I didn't always do a great job with my own PhD advisor. We struggled a little bit in the way that we interacted. I just think that maybe I needed something different at that time in my life than I was getting. And so I don't know that I have great advice, because I don't know that I was confident enough at that time in my life to say, you know what, this like isn't working for me. But coming back to sort of Rachel's point, a lot of it was building sort of a network of other people that could help support me. And if nothing else, I had people to sort of go talk to and with about the things that I struggled with. Because I don't think I was quite in a place to be able to say, like, the way that we interact right now makes me uncomfortable, which may have helped my cause at that time, but I just didn't have the language or the confidence to do that at that time. But I would echo, I guess, that idea of trying to find people that do hear you and that you can be vulnerable with.
Yeah, so just to add to that, and this is a really tricky one, I am thinking that these challenges do not only happen with students and their PhD, right? It happens with anybody who has supervisor or at any level in their career. And so this is where it's really important to remember that maybe your PhD advisor or your thesis advisor is not the mentor that you need. So you need to have a mentor, somebody who is a mentor or a sponsor, people who can advocate for you. Maybe they are on the same peer level with this person and that this person can listen to, because sometimes it's communication and it is how the communication is happening. And it's difficult to understand what people struggle with at any given moment. So as educators, some of the things that we don't always admit is that we weren't really trained to do this work. It grows on us over time. We learn to become better at mentoring and advising. And so for some people, that struggle is harder than for others. And so I'd say that the first thing as a student who has an advisor that you're struggling with is to really do find a network of people that can validate you as a researcher, as a scientist. Because it's important to have somebody say, yes, this idea makes sense. It may not be what your advisor is looking for at this moment, but it sure does has merit. Now, how do we find common ground with what they are looking for or what they expect from you? It's a very tricky balance, but for most graduate students, these are also people who have a lot of power over your professional life. So it's almost like walking a very tight rope. And I think the network that you have around you is going to be very, very useful.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that brings to the next question about confidence, because you brought it really well up to find a network that they can go to except us for the supervisor. So here is that we always hear, there is some advice that is routinely given to us in academia, like fake it till you make it, which makes the appearance of confidence highly valued in academic settings. The question here is that, have you ever felt the pressure to be incredibly independent to avoid confronting imposter syndrome? Do you advise those who feel insecure or struggle with self-doubt to share their feelings with their colleagues, or just keep that conversation out of the professional settings?
Okay. Can I go for this?
Yeah, please.
So this is interesting. Fake it till you make it. Again, I think one of the things I've grown to acknowledge a lot more is that the academic environment is primarily about learning. If you already know, you have no business being here. So I try to encourage students, learners, that it is a learning process. I don't expect you to know it all. I don't even know it all, and I cannot claim that I would ever know it all. I have to learn certain things to be able to teach and or communicate with the people that I'm working with. And sometimes they see me doing it. So I think I've mostly embraced the idea that we are in a learning community, and that it is the only thing that you should be trying to fake is trying to learn. Like, it's the learning in effort. Because if you talk to my advisor, my PhD advisor used to have what he called a ball of shame, where he'd actually post rejection letters for his manuscripts and things like that. Or he'd post like posters that he's working on and people would critique it. And I think it was a way of showing that he was not perfect as a researcher, and that he was also learning. And so for the rest of us, if he critiqued our work, it wasn't necessarily critiquing us as people, but it was trying to make it improve. And I think that's a very good way to look at it, is we are in a learning community. If you already know, you have no business in academia, really. If you think you know it all, that's my view.
Great, thank you. Yeah.
I think.
Oh, go ahead. No.
Sorry, I was going to say. Sorry, I'll get this in quick. I think that you're going to find, well, if you could know, there are your colleagues that are have struggled with imposter syndrome and similar feelings. They've been maybe much better at masking it or subverting it or faking it in a major sort of way. But there are going to be people in your department, and assuredly across the campus, whether you're a student or already a faculty or academic, that are struggling with this. And you have to keep looking for them and finding forums or outlets that you can identify them and connect with them. Don't keep the feelings inside. Whatever you do, that's painful. That's not good for you. You have to find healthy ways, but you have to be unfortunately strategic about how to do that, because some people will use that the wrong way. And I think it's important that you always keep looking for allies. They're just too essential to staying healthy while you work through these. Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, great. Rachel, do you have something to add to that?
I have nothing more to add. I think the point was already said.
Great. Yeah, great suggestion. Thank you. So just we have to speak about it, and let's just from this moment change that fake it to learn it till you make it. Yeah, that was really nice.
Can I say one thing actually related to this, depending on who this person is? So I am an intensely private person about my personal life at work. And so even when my face showed up on this flyer, I had a colleague say, well, I never knew you suffered from imposter syndrome. And so I think depending on how introverted or extroverted you are, I don't make it a point of talking with many of my colleagues about how I feel, because for me, I was raised in New England, and maybe it's part of it. There's just the sense that it's nobody's business but mine. But that means that to David's point, I do talk to people, but I talk to those people that I trust and that matter to me, and that have earned that. but not everyone's earned it. And so I don't feel a need to share how I feel with lots of people. You know, I can feel really awful about certain things and I will not let it show. And so depending on who you are, I think you don't have to tell the whole world that you feel, that you don't feel like you're worthy at moments, but tell those people that have earned that trust.
Great point. Yeah, great point. Thank you. Okay, moving on to our next question. David, we will direct this question to you to start. In academia, there appears to be constant pressure to be productive and always working. Particularly, this is always challenging, right? But particularly during a pandemic, many of us are suffering from decreased productivity, which can worsen feelings of inadequacy. Do you experience this, or any other panelists? You can add them after that. And what advice do you have on how to stay resilient during this time? I believe you were muted.
My audio is a little bit off. That was directed at me, I take it. Okay, sorry. So it's really an interesting, it was a very interesting question to kind of ponder, because the being in my last academic year, when everything shut down last spring, I didn't experience it the same way most people do, most continuing colleagues. And realistically, with things that were going on at home, with family situations, things like that, my plans for my kind of post-retirement life really got thrown off the rails completely. And because we do early retirement, so I'll be teaching in spring and off in the fall. And so I had fall semester to just sort of explore and to go back and restart some things I wanted to work on and things like that. And realistically, it's really, you know, it was kind of a tough one to figure out what to do with that when there was no way to really pursue that. And so I started thinking about that again more actively, just literally in the last few months, the last week or two. And I figured that a lot of the advice that's out there for the pandemic in general is learn something new. And the thing that came with that, along with that, is to remember you have to be more than an academic in your life to be fulfilled. How long is your academic life going to last as a part of your overall life? 25 years, 30 years? I know colleagues that have worked 40 years, but realistically it's a portion. And you need a life outside of academia. Otherwise you can end up with workaholism and other, you know, a poor personal life, or, you know, damaged personal life. There's lots of reasons why. Diversity is really, really important in your life. And I think that this is an opportunity to be creative, you know, learn something new, learn a language, learn some music, exercise. I know too many flabby fellow academics, unfortunately. Hopefully they're getting better. But realistically, there are academic things we can do. There's literature reviews that we can do online that we could never do 10 or 15, or well, as easily 10 or 15 years ago. You can look for collaborators, you can collaborate via Zoom. It's probably one of the few things in Zoom that would be fun. But to connect with people that you haven't connected with because you really can't do maybe what you're normally doing, there's a lot of different things out there. And I think forums talking about, you know, different support groups and things like that, I think if you sat down and brainstormed with your peer group and your peer mentors and your colleagues and your friends and the people like that, you can come up with a lot of different things. You can turn this into an opportunity to not feel that you're not getting anything done, but that you can do other things outside as well. So.
Great suggestion, thank you. Yeah,
yeah, I think I'd want to jump in here because yes, the pressure and the peer pressure and the community pressure to be productive, whatever productive is for different people. And I think it strikes a lot more for me because I'm mostly at a teaching institution. So our workload is 60% teaching and research is just 20%. But it's often very common that if I talk to people in other areas, it's all about where you publish and how much you publish and what the citations that you have are and all this. And it took me a little bit of I think, I don't know if that was imposter syndrome or not, but I've come to terms with the fact, like David just said, that it is about the value that I put to the work that I do. I look more at that now than what the value that other people are putting to it. Because I'm never going to reach their expectations. I'm never going to meet their standards. If it's sufficient to keep me employed and give me the fulfillment that I need, that is much more important to me. Particularly because, to David's point, even if the life that you spend in academia is just 10 years, that is your life. The idea that we have a life outside of our work is kind of mind-boggling to me, because every breath I take is a breath towards the end of my life. And to me, it has to be meaningful. Whether it's meaningful in how I interact with my community, with my mentees, with my mentors, with my work, or with my initiatives and the things that make me passionate, that is how I value my own contribution. It may not be checked in citations or in publications, but if it leaves a legacy in somebody's mind, if somebody meets me and say, I appreciate what you did for me, that is just as important, because that's what an educator has to do, is you have to pass it on. That's what I think about this, how to deal with this pressure. And yes, it may influence how you get hired or how you get published, but you also have to then think about what are the long-term goals that you have for your own professional life and your own professional career as you consider what strategies to take.
Yeah, great point. It's good to remember that. Yeah, go ahead, David. You wanted to add something?
Yes. Sorry. I want to amplify that, because that kind of points to one thing, a message to students that might be listening in. What does it take to get a faculty position, which is what drives a lot of students who go on into academia? You have to do research, right? You produce a thesis or a thesis and then a dissertation, and you publish, and you get grants, and you get on the treadmill for that. The thing about it is not everybody that goes into that is, and I'll say I did that, but I really wanted to teach. I wanted to research, I wanted to solve problems, but I really enjoyed teaching and working with students. And so I started at a research university, University of Kentucky, and then for family reasons ended up moving to a teaching institution. So I've experienced both worlds, and I found that actually some of the imposter syndrome pressure came off a little bit, because while I was on track to get all the research going, in 2 years at the research school and start churning out the publications, a lot of pressure came off when I moved to the teaching institution. So I think if you're a student aimed at academia, you need to look at the broad range and be okay with maybe a teaching university is where you'll find a better fit. And don't feel that you have to buy in entirely to that research agenda as being the be all and end all, because in the scheme of things, we all need to derive pleasure and fulfillment, and can contribute and influence the lives of others in a positive way by different types of institutions. And I think sometimes that imposter syndrome really can be intensified by trying to force yourself into a research institution or a research university, where the pressure on doing that can be so much more intense, when in fact maybe your skills, talents, or just your passions may lie in other areas. So that's why I think it's important to talk to, and why I'm glad that Hendratta's here, because to talk about that is because we're the same thing, where research is small, albeit I think unfortunately there's more emphasis placed on it, because a lot of my colleagues that want to be research university faculty, and they treat the research as being more important than teaching. Some do, but I think we as the next you all as the next generation of faculty and academics can start to really broaden that definition of what a successful academic looks like.
Great, thank you so much. They were really great insights and suggestions. So we are short on time, and this is our last question. I'm gonna start it with Rachel. In this webinar, we've touched on a few ways to address imposter syndrome, great suggestions, and so just a summary for them were through finding supportive mentors and a strong community. But do you have any other suggestions that you want to add and that could help us to quell thoughts of self-doubt and to really feel like we belong at the end?
Yeah, so what I would like to say, and it kind of builds off of the last conversation, is that your identity is not all about your academic achievements, really. That's like the base of it, and that's what I had to accept about myself. I'm much more than whatever I do in my PhD or after my PhD in terms of academia. And I cannot rely on academia to value myself. And with imposter syndrome, you're relying on other people to determine your value. So I think, you know, as you're suffering through imposter syndrome, one thing that we haven't talked about is therapy. And I can say I've gone to therapy all of my 5 years of graduate school. And it really helps when I say what I'm thinking about imposter syndrome to somebody who's unbiased. And they can really collect all of those thoughts and tell me, this is all very negative and it's not true. You belong here and you should keep going. And that's all that I would like to say to everyone else in closing, is that you do belong, which is the title of this of this talk.
Yeah, yeah, I would add to that. So I have a group of peer mentors, like we kind of try to pep each other up. And one of the things that also happens is, you know, check your vida once in a while and just kind of look at all the awesomeness that you've accomplished. And I mean the things that you value. So we do have a section of invisible labor, the things that we do that add value to our community that is not valued in the structures, but that we know from talking to others and experiences that it really has value. And so when you start throwing all of those in, you're like, oh my God, I have really done much. And sometimes kind of looking at how somebody else might look at you can be a very good stimuli when you're feeling kind of, or have somebody else look at it and say, does this make sense and does that make sense? You'd be amazed. I think we are mostly cultured to not be proud of our accomplishments. I think it should change. Like, feel happy, feel proud of the things that you've done and that you were doing because you thought they were useful. Feel proud of them.
Yeah, I think to echo Rachel, we're so much more than scientists, right? And I think it's very easy to put yourself in a place where you think you're not as worthy if you only think of yourself as a scientist, right? And I would be sad if that was the entirety of my life and I wasn't a good friend and a good family member, and I didn't take the time for the hobbies that I care about most and the people I care about most. And so take pride in the fact that you're good at all these other things, and that there are a million ways to be a successful scientist, and being like the smartest person with the best ideas, whatever that even means, is not the only way. Many of us get by being strong collaborators who work well with others and who care about other people. And you can be great in science on that path. And so don't feel like there's this one way that we all sort of hold in this aspirational way of these people that have great ideas, that has to be you. Some of those people with great ideas can't get a single thing done. And so think about what your strengths are and own those.
David, do you have anything to add to that as a final suggestion?
Just one thing that one of the other questions we didn't directly address was, will we ever feel like we fully belong? That's, I think, going to be a no for this generation. Perhaps it's going to take time. It's going to take efforts from us and others. I think that the one thing I do with students that might be worth thinking about is that I ask students who struggle with self-confidence. They and I might not think about it as imposter syndrome explicitly, although I can share that as necessary. But a lot of times it's just self-confidence. And I see that especially with first-gen students of color. And one of the things I ask them to do, since I advise science students, I say, okay, let's think like a scientist for a moment. Have you done this? Yes. That's successful, right? Yes. So I walk them through a series of kind of a objective self-assessment. And oftentimes that leads them to realize in really explicit terms, they are successful. They can be successful because that's the past predicting the future. Why would you not believe that you can be successful in the future if you're being successful now? You're doing things at most of the university. You're doing curriculum now that's much harder than 90% of the students on campus can navigate, even if you're not getting straight A's in it. And so you're succeeding where students fail. And a lot of times it's coaching when we're working with students. It's really trying to mentor them. There's a lot of different terms for it. But I think that's kind of helping the next generation in a broader sense get past this, because I think this can be solved. I think academia has got to change. That's a whole nother webinar or series of webinars. But I think alongside that change, I think we can be agents of change with our students and our peers and our colleagues, because some are going to change now. Some, sadly, probably will change little or not. But I think there is cause. I'm still hopeful after all these years.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I wanted to thank our incredible panelists for participating today and sharing their expertise and experiences with all of us. It's been a great discussion, fruitful discussion, and also thank our audience. So with that, I'm turning it back to Julia CUAHSI. Julia.
Hello, I want to reiterate that a huge thank you to our panelists today for being a part of this webinar. Again, this topic was originally suggested by a member of the CUAHSI community, and I'm so grateful to the hydrology section team, professional development team, all here listed on the slide, for taking the idea and really making this happen. I think that this webinar, as well as the recording, which will be posted on the CUAHSI YouTube page, is an incredible resource for graduate students of any field, really. And I hope that you guys got something out of it and are maybe taking steps to get over your own imposter syndrome.
Thank you for having us.
AGU H3S has opportunities to highlight students and early career scientists to share their research with the hydrologic science community with a broader audience. Feel free to reach out via Twitter or email and check out their website, all listed on this site. And one last reminder to connect with CUAHSI via our website, newsletter, Twitter, or our Slack community. You'll receive, there's a link in the chat that was posted in the chat to request to join the Slack channel, and that same link will be included kind of in the thank you for attending email that you'll receive via Zoom for attending this webinar. Again, thank you so much to our organizers and panelists, and I hope that you'll join us next month for the next installment of this webinar series. With that, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.